Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? What should we pretend today? That it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday? I don't know. I think we're going to go with Wednesday on this one. And here's what we'll do. We'll call it Wednesday, November 21st, 2018, or give or take a couple of days, depending on how we decide to run this show. And we're pre-taping for you so that you're not left hanging through the Thanksgiving break. I got word from some of you about how much you appreciate having some new content available, especially during vacation times. And we have so much that we need to catch up on. As much of a pain in the neck as it is to create the additional shows, I feel worse not covering the material. And that's regardless of how you guys feel about receiving the material. So you're off the hook. You get to not be responsible for this. This is all my own doing. What do I have for you today? Well, we need to concentrate on Matt Whitaker. Things are heating up for Matt Whitaker, and already I feel bad about doing this for a Wednesday when I really should be talking to you about this on Tuesday, and I might not be able to resist discussing it at least a little bit on Tuesday. And in fact, that's only because I feel bad about not having been able to fit it into Monday's show, and to be quite honest, that's only because I'm upset with myself for not including it in last week's shows. You get the idea? What's happening right now, the latest that I have for you on Fake Wednesday, see, by the time this airs, there'll be more, I'm sure, is the report that the Senate Democrats are suing over Whitaker's appointment as acting Attorney General. And the most exciting part about this is that they are picking up on the language that I had originally recommended we use for describing Whitaker in his position. That is, that he is the purported acting Attorney General. And that's very exciting to me. Hooray for me. I don't think anybody was listening to me when I said that they ought to do that, but I'm excited to see that it is the case. That first came to my attention when Josh Dorner tweeted, note the caption here, he was tweeting Chris Geithner's tweet about the latest article that BuzzFeed had put out on the subject. And he's got this, note the caption here, Matthew G. Whitaker in his official capacity as purported acting Attorney General. That is, it's in the captioning, I guess, of the cover page of the court filings. And that's exactly what it says here. It's Senators Richard Blumenthal, Sheldon Whitehouse, and Mazie Hirono as plaintiffs versus Matthew G. Whitaker in his official capacity as, like we said, purported acting Attorney General of the United States. I like it. And, of course, Donald Trump, too, as purported president. It doesn't say purported president in the styling of the case, but, it could. So what do we have from Chris Geithner on this subject? And the answer is nothing. We have a tweet from Chris Geithner on the subject, notifying us that this just in, Senators Blumenthal, Hirono, and Whitehouse challenge acting AG Whitaker's appointment. The lawsuit filed in federal court in D.C., and I guess that's it. It's not, all he's doing is telling us the update on it, and I have the write-up from BuzzFeed News. This one is actually from Zoe Tillman. And so Chris Geithner doesn't have anything but a series of tweets on it. But would you like to hear what he says in a series of tweets? It's always a good introduction. Not that we can't just get to what Zoe has to say, but I don't know. I feel like I promised you some Chris Geithner. So here we go. Let's see. Geithner, in addition to showing us the front page and top paragraph, opening paragraph of the filing, says the big thing to note here is that the lawsuit only brings the constitutional claims regarding the appointments clause. They do not bring the statutory claims that we've seen in the Goldstein filings in Maryland and in before the Supreme Court regarding the DOJ succession statute, that being 28 U.S. Code Section 508, As such, they do not seek an order that Deputy AG Rosenstein is the acting Attorney General, remember that case, but rather just seek an injunction against Whitaker acting as AG, which is at least as important, I think, as the Maryland case. Of course, in the absence of someone else being named as acting AG, Rosenstein would by default become the acting AG. He notes parenthetically. Here's more from Zoe Tillman. Ta-da! I told you she was coming up on the Senate Dems Whitaker lawsuit. And he's pointing to it with a little arrow here. So I guess it's time to start reading. Senate Democrats are suing over Matthew Whitaker's appointment as acting Attorney General. The senators argue that Trump's appointment of Whitaker circumvents the Senate's advice and consent role on nominees. And it does. Here's how the actual body of the article begins. 3 Senate Democrats on Monday, that would be 2 days ago, because it's today. It's what I'm telling you. Insider information. I'm reading it on Monday. You got it? Okay. But we're listening on Wednesday. 3 Senate Democrats on Monday, all that time ago, it's like an eternity already, filed the latest legal challenge to President Donald Trump's appointment of Matthew Whitaker as acting Attorney General, arguing that his appointment circumvents the Senate's role in the confirmation process. The constitutionality and lawfulness of Whitaker's appointment have been under scrutiny since Trump appointed him on November 7th, after a former Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, Whitaker's former boss, was forced out. Legal scholars and former Justice Department officials have questioned whether a non-Senate confirmed official, such as Whitaker, can serve as the nation's top law enforcement officer, even on an acting basis, and judges are being asked to weigh in. Legal challenges to Whitaker's appointment have already been filed in cases before the U.S. Supreme Court and in federal district court in Maryland. The underlying lawsuits in those cases predate Whitaker's appointment, and the challengers argue that because Whitaker must be formally substituted for Sessions as the top Justice Department official in the proceedings, the court needs to decide if Whitaker is lawfully serving as acting Attorney General. The lawsuit filed Monday in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia on behalf of Senators Richard Blumenthal, Mazie Hirono, and Sheldon Whitehouse is the first case filed as a direct challenge to Whitaker's appointment. The Senate vets and confirms senior executive branch officials, including the U.S. Attorney General, as you know, although there is a federal law, the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, that gives the president authority to appoint an acting Attorney General. The senators argue that the move was unconstitutional under the Appointments Clause, which states that the president, quote, shall nominate and by and with the advice and consent of the Senate, shall nominate officers of the United States. The senators argue that they're in a unique position to challenge Whitaker's appointment because of the role they play in the confirmation process. Indeed, if allowed to stand, Mr. Whitaker's appointment would create a roadmap for the evasion of the constitutionally prescribed Senate advice and consent role, lawyers for the senators from the Protect Democracy Project and Constitutional Accountability Center argued in the complaint. This is the third case that Blumenthal, Hirono, and Whitehouse have brought against the Trump administration. Interesting. They're working as a team and over, eh? They're also suing the president over his refusal to divest from his businesses since taking office, arguing that it violates the Constitution's prohibition on officials accepting foreign emoluments, as well as for records related to Justice Brett Kavanaugh's nomination. In the emoluments case, a federal judge found that the senators had standing to sue because, under the Constitution, Congress was supposed to get a say in whether to approve any emoluments. That bodes well here, then. The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel issued a memo last week defending the constitutionality and lawfulness of Whitaker's appointment. I have that lying around here somewhere in pocket. We could take a look at it. The office acknowledged that it was almost unprecedented for a non-Senate confirmed official to serve as acting Attorney General. There was one such appointment in 1866, according to the OLC, but pointed to other examples of non-Senate confirmed individuals serving in senior level posts on an acting basis. Lawyers in the office concluded that the Federal Vacancies Reform Act applied to someone in Whitaker's position. President Trump's designation of Matt Whitaker as acting Attorney General of the United States is lawful and comports with the Federal Vacancies Reform Act, the Appointments Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Supreme Court precedent, past Department of Justice opinions, and actions of U.S. presidents, both Republican and Democrat, Justice Department spokesperson Kerry Kupec said in a statement on Monday. There are over 160 instances in American history in which non-Senate confirmed persons performed, on a temporary basis, the duties of a Senate confirmed position. To suggest otherwise is to ignore centuries, well, barely, centuries of practice and precedent. Okay. Well, that wraps it up for the Zoe Tillman piece here. So at least we get a flavor for what they're doing, that they're attacking the appointment directly. And interestingly enough, that it's the same trio of senators doing all of these things together. That's interesting in its own right. Well worth noting, and I guess good on you for taking all of these subjects on. I would have thought that you might have been able to spread the burden more broadly, but I'm glad. I'm glad you did it, and I'm glad it's been. I wish there were more, I guess, coming along with you. Okay, so I mentioned that we have somewhere in here, and I guess I could have just used their link. But I've got here, yes, the Washington Post's entry in this, in terms of the legal memo. This from Devlin Barrett and Karun. Did she say Karun or Karen? Did we hit on her name before? Demirjian. Karun Demirjian. That's a good compromise pronunciation. I think that's even the one we may have done last time, if I'm not mistaken. This is a piece from November 14th. That's like ancient history, given that it's Wednesday already. Justice Department releases legal memo defending Whitaker's appointment as acting Attorney General. This is the, I guess, probably what they were referring to in the BuzzFeed piece, though they may have been linking to their own piece on the same subject. The Justice Department released a memorandum Wednesday, not today, last Wednesday, defending the legality of President Trump's appointment of Matthew G. Whitaker as acting Attorney General, rejecting criticism from some lawyers that the move violates the Constitution. Well, now some of those lawyers are suing. So, okay, they reject the criticism, and now they got to defend their rejection of it. Since the announcement last week, and it's still last week, some have charged that Whitaker, who served as the chief of staff to the previous Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, is ineligible to serve as head of the Justice Department because he is not a Senate-confirmed official. On Tuesday, Maryland Attorney General Brian E. Frosch, a Democrat, asked a federal judge to block Whitaker's appointment, arguing that Deputy Attorney General Rod J. Rosenstein should instead take on the role. The Justice Department's Office of Legal Counsel, which provides legal guidance to the federal government, said in a 20-page memo that past practice, court rulings, and legal analysis show the Whitaker appointment is legal. In particular, it says, the scenario is expressly authorized by the 1998 Federal Vacancies Reform Act. The memo also notes that before Sessions was forced out of the job, the White House had sought advice from the OLC and was told that Whitaker could be appointed. So that's an interesting method of validating it. Well, we say that the appointment would be valid. Well, on what basis do you say this? You asked us before you did it, and we said it would be. Okay, I don't think that they're actually, going forward in court with the argument that, well, we said it, and so therefore we said it. But that's interesting. As all three branches of government have long recognized, the president may designate an acting official to perform the duties of a vacant principal office, including a cabinet office, when the acting official has not been confirmed by the Senate, the memo said. The memo notes that Trump has now done it 6 times, while President Barack Obama did it twice, and that President George W. Bush did it once. Interestingly, the legal opinion also concludes that even if Trump had fired Sessions, remember they maintain that they did not, that he resigned, he could have replaced him with a non-Senate confirmed government employee for a period of up to 7 months, or more if a nomination was pending. By that reasoning, the president has the power to remove cabinet-level officials at will and put their replacements in charge of major government branches for half a year or more. Critics of the Whitaker selection have argued that the Federal Vacancies Reform Act should not take precedence over other statutes and the Constitution's formula for replacing senior government officials. Trump tapped Whitaker to serve as acting attorney general last week. Again, that would be now 2 weeks ago. After Sessions resigned at the president's request, Whitaker's elevation has raised concerns about his qualifications, his past statements as a U.S. Senate candidate, and his business practices. And we haven't even gotten to all of that. But we may make Whitaker a focus of today, Wednesday's show. Now it has to be Wednesday. Otherwise, we look ridiculous. Isn't this hilarious now that you're hearing this on Thursday? Okay. Well, who knows what's going to happen. We might put it on Wednesday. We might not. Who knows? We'll see. Critics, we said the critics of Whitaker's selection argue that the Federal Vacancies Reform Act shouldn't take precedence over the other statutes, right? Or the Constitution. Trump put Whitaker in place 2 weeks ago. We got all of that on the record. The OLC's legal analysis of the practice found, as we heard from the BuzzFeed article, 160 such instances, all of them occurring before 1860, when things were a little crazy out there, I guess, in which a non-Senate confirmed official became the acting head of an agency. And remember, Congress couldn't act with quite as much dispatch back then, which is an amazing thing to say because Congress is still pretty slow about these things, but that was just the nature of, the technology of communications and transportation back then really would have likely necessitated a lot more loose play with replacement government officials. Not to mention the fact that, people were dropping dead with somewhat more frequency. Anyway, 160 such instances, all of them occurring before 1860, in which a non-Senate confirmed official became the acting head of an agency. In 1866, a non-Senate confirmed assistant attorney general served as an acting attorney general, according to the memo signed by Assistant Attorney General Stephen A. Engel. Do we believe him? Who knows? What's the difference? Concerns about Whitaker's appointment stem partly from unanswered questions about what, if anything, the new acting attorney general may do to try to steer the ongoing probe of Russian interference in the 2016 election. The investigation has also focused on whether any Trump associates conspired with Russia to interfere with the election. Sure, that's a concern. Just generally speaking, though, they're concerned and that, Whitaker, we know from the writing so far, has lots of questions swirling around him. But even if he hadn't, I mean, the whole reason that there's an advice and consent clause and the whole reason that has been interpreted in modern practice to mean, a series of hearings, a background investigation, etc., is we need to know who we are entrusting with tremendous government powers, and we need to know that they're free from outside influence and undue influences from any source, really. But, we want to know all about their background. Are they taking bribes? Are there reasons to believe they have conflicts of interest? Are they Russian agents? Whatever you want to know, that would allow you to come to the point where at least some majority of the Senate would trust this person, or would be, I guess all we can really say, would be willing to go on record as saying they trust them even if they really don't. I guess that's good enough for us. Okay, so back to the article. The probe, that is the Russia investigation, led by Special Counsel Robert S. Mueller III, in case you had forgotten, has been supervised by Rosenstein, the number 2 Justice Department official, because Sessions had recused himself from the case when he was Attorney General. Whitaker, according to people close to him, has no intention of recusing himself from the Russia probe. He's not an idiot. He knows where his bread is buttered. Although Justice Department officials have said he will follow normal department procedures for any possible ethics issues, which is to say, no, he won't. Concerns about the Russia probe's independence have prompted renewed efforts in Congress to pass legislation that would prevent Mueller from being fired without good cause. On Wednesday, again, last Wednesday, Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, who's barely relevant at all in any of this, said he would not vote for any judicial nominations until Senate leaders allowed a floor vote on legislation he's pushing that would bar the administration from firing Mueller without good cause. Flake's position could prevent confirmation of any judges until a new congressional session begins in January, when he will leave the Senate. And, of course, we only say it could because, A, it probably won't. B, he's liable to change his mind. And C, one vote from Republicans won't make any difference in that. We need another one. Okay, so there's more about Whitaker. It's all over the place. And now we're just going to have to kind of inch our way backward chronologically in the order in which I queued things in Pocket, because there's just too much about Whitaker to organize in any other way now that we've started rolling. Okay, what do we get? What do we hit first when we roll back this way? All right, it's this one, and this is an important one. And all right, opening it up here. Where are we for this one? Esquire, and not even Charles Pierce. It's Jack Holmes on this piece. An exhaustive timeline of our new acting attorney general's astoundingly crooked career. That does sound interesting, doesn't it? Year by year, the one-time Iowa tight end descended into grifting and scamming. He's a perfect match for his new boss. This is a November 14th piece. Again, Jack Holmes, the writer on this one. It seems like in this era, he begins, the more blatant something is, the easier it is to get away with. Yes, I've often thought about that. Take, for example, President Trump's appointment of a guy who used to defend him against Special Counsel Robert Mueller's probe on CNN to oversee this probe. This is like appointing Jeffrey Lord to run a Martin Luther King Jr. Day parade. I assume it would be, but okay. It's almost like Trump's base of support has agreed to let him do anything. Like, say, obstruct justice and destroy the rule of law, as long as he comes right out and does it in public. Or, they just don't give a damn. Matthew Whitaker was elevated to acting attorney general after the president canned, that word, Jeff Sessions, whom El Jefe has hated ever since Sessions did perhaps the only honorable thing in his miserable public career and recused himself from overseeing an investigation into the Trump campaign, a campaign that Sessions himself served on. In the before times, this was known as a conflict of interest. The president's beef was that the attorney general then could not protect him from the Russia probe, as if the AG is his personal lawyer rather than the nation's chief law enforcement officer. Now, he's found a guy in Whitaker to defend him against the investigation who's talked publicly about ways to torpedo it. And herein embedded is just such a discussion on a CNN panel. We won't listen to that at the moment, but moving on, Trump passed over multiple Senate-confirmed candidates for the acting AG position and tapped Whitaker in a move that even George W. Bush torture lawyer John Yoo says is unconstitutional. The state of Maryland is suing over the move, contending the same. The Justice Department released a memo last Wednesday, defending the legality of Whitaker's appointment. It's like we're all reading the same news. But how exactly did we get here? How the hell did Whitaker get anywhere near the Attorney General's office when not too long ago he was peddling hot tubs for a company that was shut down for defrauding customers? Hadn't even heard that one. Below, there's a little timeline of Whitaker's life. It paints a picture of a Trump loyalist and longtime Republican operative who has repeatedly attacked the Mueller investigation he is now overseeing and defended those under investigation, who has close ties to people intimately involved in the investigation, who was described as the White House's eyes and ears in the Justice Department when he was Jeff Sessions' chief of staff, who proved himself willing to politicize federal investigations as a U.S. attorney, who participated in scams and grifts in his business dealings, who has crackpot views on constitutional law, and who got into this racket by defending the president on television. That's really the biggest point in all of this, is the most amazing thing, that all you have to do to catapult yourself from nowhere to essentially the Attorney General's office is go on TV and say nice things about Donald Trump. All right. So the timeline follows, but we will shortly be taking a break. We're actually going to try and work our breaks into these Thanksgiving holiday shows. But let's get started with it because, of course, the first entry in this timeline, I think, is a superfluous one. But here it is, October 29th, 1969. Now, what in the world was happening all the way back in 1969 in Matt Whitaker's life? The answer is not much, at least not until October 29th, 1969, when he was born. Does that really have to be in here? Okay, so there you have it. Happy birthday recently, by the way, Mr. purported acting Attorney General. All right, let's see. So born in Des Moines, Iowa, and that makes him 49 years old. In the early 1990s, this is a big jump in the timeline, but okay, I'll accept it. Early 1990s, he attended the University of Iowa, where he played football, including in the 1991 Rose Bowl game, which is fantastic. I'm sure it was a great moment for him. According to the Cedar Rapids Gazette, he once wanted to be a movie mogul after graduation. And that's not a bad aspiration. I think I would have liked to have done that after graduation, too. 1995, though, Whitaker graduated from law school and worked at regional firms and in corporate law before jumping into Republican politics. And as we know, that was his real ticket to the big time. So the nature of the timeline shifts after that, but we'll take a short break, recoup for just a moment, and come back and reveal all the sordid secrets after this. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning, interrupting this little break to say thanks so much to all of you who are contributing supporters of Kagro in the Morning. Thousands of you are downloading the show each day, but fewer than 1 in 25 regular listeners are donating to help keep us on the air. For the money you'd spend on a single 3-minute iTunes song, we bring you 2 hours of great news and entertainment every day, 5 days a week. Patreon.com, Patreon.com makes it easy. You can find us there by searching KagroX or David Waldman or Kagro in the Morning or even Daily Coast Radio in their search box, and you'll be right where you need to be to make easy, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Once again, thanks so much for your support. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. And boy, I hope we've timed this thing out right. It occurs to me every time we do one of these shows where we pre-tape, I'm not working with the real-time clock that I usually use to time the intros and outros. But all right, well, we're doing our best here, trying to get this thing on track. Let's get back then to the Matthew Whitaker timeline, which to date has not been all that interesting. Born 1969, graduated from the University of Iowa in the 1990s. Then by 95, he has graduated from law school and doing the respectable enough thing, working at regional law firms and in corporate law before jumping into Republican politics. That's the most disreputable thing that he has done to date. But he does so with full knowledge that he can use his political connections to launch or relaunch a legal career, which, I can't qualify how it was going. It seems like he was, I guess, doing okay, but I suppose he aspired to bigger things, and this is ordinarily a good thing. He's an evil person, and so this is a bad thing. But aspiring to something greater than working in regional law firms in Des Moines, which I'm sure is a very good living and a respectable one, but he has political ambition. So 2002 is our next entry in the timeline here. He reached out to an old friend from law school. It's a link here to a New York Times article, I guess a recent one, about his rise to power. Anyway, his old friend is Charles Larson Jr., who had since become chairman of the Iowa Republican Party. And he decides, in reaching out to him, that he will run for Iowa State Treasurer. He toured Iowa's 99 counties and campaigned with Republican U.S. Senator Chuck Grassley, but lost to a longtime Democratic incumbent. So too bad for you there, except that's probably my preferred outcome. Interesting, though, he campaigned around the state with Grassley, who would, of course, be in charge of overseeing the hearings that would otherwise confirm him in the advice and consent process. But, whether or not they ever go through with that, I don't know. And, of course, the leadership of the Judiciary Committee may be set to change hands as well as between Republicans. So we'll see. I thought I had heard some discussion of that, though I'm not positive of it. Anyway, next entry on the timeline comes in 2004, June 15th, 2004. On the recommendation of Grassley, with whom he campaigned, and despite having no experience in law enforcement, Whitaker was appointed, not suggested for the role of, but actually appointed, U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa by President George W. Bush. Who doesn't care about anything? The most important cases Mr. Whitaker cited in his questionnaire to the Senate Judiciary Committee, the New York Times reports, dealt with a personal injury claim and breaches of contracts. We read some more specifics about that, I think, a little while ago, maybe last week. Last week. Iowans knew him as a star football player, of course, Grassley told the Times, and we have since heard that, maybe he wasn't such a big star after all. 2005 to 2007 is the next entry, which says Whitaker oversaw the prosecution of a case against Iowa State Senator Matt McCoy. Remember this story? A gay liberal Democrat alleging McCoy tried to extort $2,000. As a Des Moines Register opinion columnist put it, the case was, quote, based on the word of a man, former associates depicted as a drug user, a deadbeat, and an abuser of women. A man so shady, even his Alcoholics Anonymous sponsors called him a pathological liar. The jury acquitted McCoy after 25 minutes of deliberation, a stark departure from the 90% conviction rate in federal cases. U.S. attorneys in Whitaker's office also neglected to mention during court proceedings that the FBI had paid the witness to tape his conversations with McCoy. That's terribly unusual, but neglecting to say as much is a pretty blatant violation of legal ethics. But hey, I'm just telling you what happened. As McCoy would later put it in an op-ed for Politico, the investigation, quote, was part of what would come to be widely considered a politically motivated effort by the Department of Justice to investigate Democratic office holders. Yes, and I remember something about that. And, what's the timeline on that? 2005 to 2007. Was that about the time? I'm just curious here. Let's do some live Googling. I am curious, I guess, to see whether the timing of that investigation and, in particular, McCoy's characterization of it coincides with the prosecution of former Alabama Governor Don Siegelman. And I am thinking that it might. Let's see. In 2006, Siegelman was convicted on federal felony corruption charges and sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. You do remember that story, right? Now, I am pretty sure that we just read that. The timeline on this was 2005 to 2007. So, Whitaker prosecutes McCoy in what McCoy describes in Politico, and that would be most recently in the last month or so, of course. I'm going to open that one up just to hold on to that. He describes it as part of what would be widely considered a politically motivated effort by the Department of Justice to investigate Democratic office holders. I wonder if there's any mention of Siegelman there. We've discussed, I think, years ago, the Siegelman case on the show. And that was really, that was one of the more astounding stories to come out of the Karl Rove era of the George W. Bush administration. And it kind of got overshadowed. But one of the things that overshadowed it was the U.S. Attorney's scandal. So, we're talking about a guy who was, once again, like Forrest Gump, just happened to be at every inflection point of Republican lawlessness in the past two administrations. Very interesting. We'll have to go back and take a peek at that. November 2009 through 2017 is the next entry on the timeline. And that's a pretty wide expanse there. 2009 to 2017. Of course, all it says here is that Whitaker left his job as U.S. Attorney, which leads us to believe that he served there from 2009 through 2017, and then in 2017 left his job as U.S. Attorney when President Barack Obama's replacement was confirmed. Oh, I see. Gotcha. He left in 2009. I'm mixed up here. When Obama came in. Why is it putting it that way? So I guess what it's trying to say here is, what it should have said is 2009, Whitaker leaves his job as U.S. Attorney when President Barack Obama's replacement is confirmed. And then from November of 2009 to 2017, he went on to serve as a partner at the small general practice firm Whitaker, Hagenau, and Gustav, LLP, in Des Moines. Okay, so partner in his own small general practice. That's what they were calling it. 2011, though, while there, I guess, and in his second year at his own firm, Whitaker was one of 61 candidates for 3 spots on the Iowa Supreme Court. He got an interview, but was eliminated from consideration early in the process. Just the fact that he gets on the list. I mean, consider his experience. He was U.S. Attorney, and that kind of, by itself, justifies putting him on the list. But then when you look back at this thing, when does he become U.S. Attorney? 2005? Let's see. Appointed U.S. Attorney. Oh, 2004. June 15th, 2004. He's appointed U.S. Attorney. And then he's gone in for 5, 6, 7, 8, 4 years. So he serves a little under 4 years. He's gone in 2009. And in 2011, 2 years later, he's on the list for Iowa Supreme Court. And remember that he had no prior law enforcement experience before getting the U.S. Attorney job. So that's a pretty quick move. But all right, to their credit, the Iowans eliminated him from consideration early in the process. The following year, 2012, he served in the Iowa branch of the presidential campaigns of Republicans Tim Pawlenty and then subsequently Rick Perry. Loser and loser. But okay. Moving on. Later in 2012, Whitaker and 2 partners purchased an affordable housing development in Des Moines through their company MEM Investment. It did not, according to Time, the magazine, go well. What do they have to say about it? While in private business, Acting Attorney General, thank you, Matthew Whitaker walked away from a taxpayer-subsidized apartment rehabilitation project in Iowa after years of cost overruns, delays, and other problems, public records show. The city of Des Moines ultimately yanked an affordable housing loan that Whitaker's company had been awarded, and another lender began foreclosure proceedings after Whitaker defaulted on a separate loan for nearly $700,000. Several contractors complained that they were not paid, and a process server for one contractor could not even find Whitaker or his company to serve him with a lawsuit because he was so prominent in the community, etc., etc. Unpaid contractors? No wonder he got a gig from Donald Trump. Ta-da! All right, what's the link here? Is it really just probably to a story about unpaid bills and unpaid contractors for Trump? Okay. 2014 is our next entry. Whitaker was a candidate for the U.S. Senate seat vacated by retiring Tom Harkin. He lost out on the Republican nomination to Joni Ernst and her ad about castrating hogs. You remember that? In a debate, he suggested he would only vote for judges who had a biblical worldview and that secular judges could be unfit to serve. Surprising that he then lost that primary. As a reminder, the First Amendment of the Constitution declares Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, which Thomas Jefferson clarified was intended to construct a wall between church and state. You remember all of that. But he doesn't care because in political law, you can say and do whatever you want. May 21st, 2014 is the next entry. As a Senate candidate, Whitaker gave an interview to a site called Caffeinated Thoughts, I believe we've read about this one, in which he suggested that Marbury versus Madison, the foundational Supreme Court decision that found the court is the final arbiter of constitutional issues and would therefore allow you to sit there and say dumb things like we should take a biblical worldview of this, was wrongly decided. This is, to say the least, an extreme viewpoint in the context of American jurisprudence. If the Supreme Court isn't tasked with deciding what's ultimately constitutional, what is the court's purpose? But Whitaker also suggested the court should not have upheld various pieces of New Deal legislation, which might include the Social Security or Fair Labor Standards Acts. That would seem to be in conflict with his claim that the court should not have the final say on what laws are constitutional, a view that is itself, again, totally bonkers. Okay, I get the point. Yes. In other words, if you are of the opinion that Marbury versus Madison was wrongly decided and that the court ought not to be the final arbiter of what is and isn't constitutional, then your idea that the court ought to strike down New Deal legislation is, well, without foundation. Why would you be able to strike down a law just because you're sitting on the court? Well, gimme-tarian. I need what I need. I want what I want. I'm taking the pieces that I like and discarding the rest. He also said the Department of Education should be disbanded. Very popular thing among campaign-in-a-box Republicans to say at the time. He said he's never supported raising any tax ever and backed canning the graduated income tax in favor of the flat tax, also right out of the box. He did concede climate change may be real, although he opposed efforts to deal with it. So, could be that it's still a hoax. Could be that the science is still out. Any number of excuses that were available to campaigns in a box at the time. Also, 2014, another entry after his failed Senate bid. Whitaker became campaign chairman for Sam Clovis, whose name rings a bell, of course, because of his connection with the Trump campaign and, more importantly, the Mueller investigation of the Trump campaign. He was at the time running for state treasurer, which Matt himself had run for a couple years prior, right? Clovis failed in that bid, but subsequently became Donald Trump's national campaign co-chairman in 2014. That didn't go so well either. Clovis was later listed an unnamed campaign supervisor in the special counsel's indictment of Trump campaign advisor George Papadopoulos, and said in a May 2018 radio interview that he'd been interviewed by Mueller's investigators and testified before the grand jury that Mueller convened. So, the person now overseeing Mueller's investigation is closely tied to one of the witnesses in that investigation and who was named in an indictment produced by the investigation. No problem, though. Another 2014 entry. Busy year. Whitaker joined the board of World Patent Marketing. We heard about these guys, right? An invention promotion firm that turned out to be the world's biggest scam. Essentially, the company's business model was to take inventors' money and tell them they were getting their patents approved and their products marketed, but actually doing none of that and pocketing the money. WPM, quote, simply took cash without ever meeting or reviewing any pitches, unquote, and, quote, virtually none of the firm's clients ever made money, unquote. For this, the Federal Trade Commission fined the group $26 million and banned the founder from doing business in the field. Washington Post's Dana Milbank reported that WPM's, that's World Patent Marketing's, work included claiming there was, quote, DNA evidence collected in 2013 proving that Bigfoot does exist. Wow, Bigfoot again? And asserting that time travel could be, quote, possible, perhaps within the next decade, and announced in the same press release trumpeting Whitaker's appointment to the board that they'd secured a patent for a, quote, masculine toilet, unquote. This one is new to me, and I can't believe it's escaped notice until now. I think I did see somebody tweet something crazy about that, and I just figured, Twitter, you so crazy. But I guess it's connected to this now. Bigfoot, I thought I saw that in the recent past too, and I thought they were talking about the congressman who's the author of the Bigfoot porn, right? Or I can't even remember which one that one was, but no, two Bigfoot freaks apparently moving into government at the same time. Well, plus the masculine toilet. So that's kind of a wash, right? Everybody needs a masculine toilet. What does that mean? I don't even know what that means. Anyway, moving on. They even included a measurement for what? I got to start this over again. The Washington Post's Dana Milbank. I might have to open up the Dana Milbank story at some point. Clearly, I'm not getting enough of what's going on. I don't think I've ever been compelled to open a Dana Milbank story before, but we left off about saying, okay, so the patent marketers, what they're doing, claiming that DNA evidence collected in 2013 proves that Bigfoot does exist, asserting that time travel could be possible, unless they're trying to sell a time travel machine patent. Okay. And announced in the same press release, trumpeting Whitaker's appointment to the board, that they'd secured a patent for a masculine toilet. They even included a measurement, why, for the size of, quote, average male genitalia, unquote. That's what it says. Suggesting their product was, quote, for those of us who measure longer than that. I see. So a masculine toilet is one that your gigantic dong doesn't fall into. Can I say that? I don't even. Is that what that is? It's like the old joke about the people, three guys pissing off the side of a bridge, right? Or maybe it's two guys, because what does the third guy says? I don't know. But the whole joke was they're pissing off the side of the bridge. Have you never heard this joke? Is this possible? You're looking at me like you've never heard the joke. No one is looking at me, of course. I'm pre-recording this, and it's radio. But it gives me the excuse to tell it in case you haven't heard it. We're the first guy, and I don't know. I can't remember whether there's three guys, and if so, what the two key guys say as they're peeing off the side of the bridge over the river. One says, hey, the water's cold. Get it? Because he reaches all the way down to the water. And then the other one says, and deep. These guys, of course, I don't think they'd be able to walk around town. I don't know, how do they make it to the bridge? They must have. The two guys who have to pee terribly are debilitated by the giant genitalia that they have, and they're riding across town on two separate flatbed trucks, apparently, when they both simultaneously realize the need to urinate. Now, urinating is obviously a great difficulty for them because any other public facilities, or public or private for that matter, would obviously not accommodate these gentlemen. They needed to go, maybe that was it. They were going elsewhere, but they said, I have to go to the bathroom first, by which I mean not the bathroom at all. Take me to the bridge because that's the only place I can pee comfortably. That's the whole premise of this thing. This guy is actually trying to market such a toilet / be Attorney General of the United States and likes Bigfoot. So, I think maybe I think I'd vote no. But Whitaker wasn't just on the board. No, he wasn't just on the board of the company with the masculine toilet and the Bigfoot and the time travel. He could be found promoting hot tub designs. Hot tub designs big enough to accommodate those of you who need masculine toilets. Well, read on. Embedded herein is a tweet from John Swain, which says, I don't know who John Swain is. Should we find out? Should we just click just to figure this out? John Swain is senior reporter for The Guardian, U.S. So there you have it. I just wanted to make sure I was up to date on that. John Swain tweets, in this August 2015 email, Trump's new purported acting AG, yes, Matthew Whitaker, threatens a victim of the patent scam firm that was paying Whitaker as an advisor. The firm was sued by the U.S. government in order to pay $26 million just 6 months ago, right? Remember this? And we discussed this case, I think, where he's arguing with the person saying, hey, you took my money and you didn't do anything. And he threatens him and says, I used to be a U.S. attorney and you better look out. Okay. There's also John Swain's second tweet here. Here is future United States Attorney General. Again, I dispute it. Matthew Whitaker promoting advances in hot tub design for scammers, world patent marketing. And there he is. It's a YouTube video or something like it embedded here. I haven't looked at it. And quite frankly, I'm not 100% certain that's not the masculine toilet from the looks of the design, but whatever. Okay, and perhaps most importantly, in fact, he could be found using his resume as a former U.S. attorney to threaten clients who intended to go public about how World Patent Marketing had scammed them. That is. In August of 2015, finally a new entry, the Miami New Times, remember them? And I had asked, by the way, about their reliability, and several of you responded, yes, absolutely solid and reliable. So I'll take your word for it. Well, in August of 2015, the Miami New Times tells us Whitaker decided to go after one possible client himself, sending a threatening letter from his official firm account. Was that the one that he sent to the guy who also said that he too was a former U.S. attorney? I can't remember. Anyway, I do remember that case. That, ladies and gentlemen, is the current purported acting, Attorney General in a previous life, not that far removed from this one, by the way, leveraging his career in federal law enforcement to run protection for a criminal enterprise. True, and a good way of putting it. Direct and to the point. May 10th, 2017, another entry in our timeline here. By 2017, the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, had levied millions in fines on WPM and shuttered it as a scam. Whitaker then penned an op-ed in The Hill defending Trump's firing of James Comey, which prompted the appointment of Special Counsel Robert Mueller as the right decision. Trump said on national television he fired Comey over the Russia thing, an apparent admission, it is an admission, that it was an attempt to obstruct justice, and told the two Russian ambassadors he hosted, well, one Russian ambassador, one foreign minister, in the office the next day that firing Comey, the, quote, nut job, had eased the pressure of the investigation. Even if you disregard all of that, this indicates Whitaker's opposition to Mueller's appointment in the first place. So, very true, salient point. June 9th, 2017, Whitaker declared in a radio interview that, quote, there is no criminal obstruction of justice charge to be had here against the president, unquote. That is one of the charges under investigation by the special counsel's office that Whitaker is now overseeing. So again, he doesn't believe in this mission here, which is a little bit like the president told members of the military not that long ago. I guess over our crazy weekend. We didn't discuss that one yet. Unless, of course, we discussed it yesterday. Wink, wink, right? Okay. July 13th, 2017. Whitaker defended the infamous Trump Tower meeting. Defended that? Really? Between Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, a Kremlin-linked lawyer, and a number of others. We don't have to pronounce their names. Thank God. This is great writing. The incident is under scrutiny as part of the Russia probe. July 26th. I thought it was June, but it's July 26, 2017. The same month, the New York Times broke the story of the infamous Trump Tower meeting. Whitaker really went for it on CNN. Here is the transcript of his part of it. Whitaker saying, and that's why those same code of federal regulations govern the budget of the special counsel, and that is well within the purview of the Attorney General. So I could see a scenario where Jeff Sessions is replaced. It would recess appointment. What is replaced? It would recess appointment. Okay. And that Attorney General doesn't fire Bob Mueller, but he just reduces his budget to so low that his investigation grinds almost to a halt. The guy who suggested this is now, purportedly, the acting Attorney General. On July 27, 2017, before he locked his Twitter account, Fortune magazine found Whitaker had tweeted that any effort by Congress to protect Mueller's role would be, quote, a mistake. August 8th, 2017, Whitaker penned an op-ed for CNN headlined, Mueller's investigation of Trump is going too far. Here's the lead. We heard about it. I don't think we ever read any of it. Last month, when President Donald Trump was asked by the New York Times if special counsel Robert Mueller would be crossing a line if he started investigating the finances of Trump and his family. The president said, quote, "I think that's a violation. Look, this is about Russia," unquote. The president is absolutely correct. Mueller has come up to a red line in the Russia 2016 election meddling investigation that he is dangerously close to crossing. Of course, this disregards the fact that the president's past financial dealings may be relevant to his behavior and decision-making during the 2016 campaign. Say, in the as-yet unproven scenario that he got tangled up with Russian money in the early 2000s. But it does indicate Whitaker has clear views on what the scope of Mueller's probe should be. August 20th of 2017, now Whitaker promoting an article on Twitter calling Mueller's investigative team a lynch mob and urging the president's legal team not to cooperate with the special counsel's office. September of 2017, Whitaker was named Jeff Sessions' chief of staff at the Justice Department, all of a sudden, where he was warmly received initially until others became concerned about his intentions. CNN reports they might have had good reason. Whitaker was not hired as Sessions' chief of staff by virtue of any pre-existing relationship with Sessions, but instead because White House officials believed Whitaker's loyalties would lie at the White House and not with the beleaguered Attorney General, sources said. This was backed up by a New York Times report, and herein is a embedded tweet from Robert Fattorecci. Hope I haven't mangled his name too badly. John Kelly has privately described Matthew Whitaker as the West Wing's eyes and ears in a department the president has long considered at war with him. And now up to October of 2017, when Whitaker, according to the New York Times, had been explicit about his plans before he made it into the Justice Department. By October of last year, Mr. Whitaker was telling people that he was working as a political commentator on CNN in order to get the attention of Mr. Trump. We'll be back with more after this. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Once again, I have, in my haste, forgotten that I am supposed to be using this 1-minute version of the music. Hit the 2-minute version of the music for our 1-minute break, so that means I'm going to have to slowly back out of this with the music. And now we are crossing our fingers that we got the timing right with respect to lining up our third break. We'll probably have to go back and edit a bunch of this, and it will become a gigantic pain in the butt, and then we will realize, oh yes, the rest of the episodes that we are going to pre-record are going to be without commercials, which is probably better for you anyway, although occasionally it's nice to take a break. Anyway, we had just launched into our October 2017 entry in this timeline in Esquire magazine of the purported acting attorney general's astoundingly, what did they call it? I'll have to scroll all the way back up here. Astoundingly crooked career. Jack Holmes's compilation of his activities leading up to, the current position of purported acting attorney general. Let's see. We were just dealing with the October entry, right? October 2017. Whitaker, according to the New York Times, had been explicit about his plans before he made it into the Justice Department. We have this, I guess, this happened earlier, or was this back in, I don't know. Anyway, by October of last year, I guess October 2017, Whitaker was telling people that he was working as a political commentator on CNN in order to get the attention of Mr. Trump, said John Q. Barrett, a professor at St. John's University School of Law, who met Mr. Whitaker during a television appearance last June. His plan worked. We heard about that. According to CNN, Sam Clovis, the Trump campaign national co-chair who was since named in a Mueller indictment and testified before the Mueller grand jury, was the one to encourage Whitaker to start making TV appearances to get Trump's attention. September 2018, that's almost now. After a quiet year serving as the White House's eyes and ears in the Justice Department, a clear assault on the independence of the department from political considerations, and an assault on the rule of law that John Kelly often held up as the adult in the room in this White House, was fully on board with, it looked like Whitaker was set for the big time. Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, who was overseeing the Russia probe after Jeff Sessions' recusal, appeared on the brink of resigning after a report emerged he'd said Trump was unfit for the presidency, which he is. A New York Times report suggested Whitaker was set to be named his acting replacement. Matthew G. Whitaker, the chief of staff to Attorney General Jeff Sessions, would become the acting number 2 official at the Justice Department. His White House counterpart, John F. Kelly, told him over the phone on Saturday morning. According to 2 people briefed on the call, to the White House, he was an obvious choice, a confident former college football player and United States attorney whom Mr. Kelly has privately described as the West Wing's eyes and ears in a department the president has long considered at war with him. That comes up again. Very interesting. And once again, the mention of his having been a football player is of no interest. But okay, obviously, this would also have been insane. But Rosenstein decided to stay on, prompting the current next level insanity less than 2 months later. October 11th, 2018. Quote, "I can tell you, Matt Whitaker's a great guy," President Trump said in a Fox News interview. "I know Matt Whitaker." November 7th, 2018, a day after Democrats swept into control of the House of Representatives in the 2018 midterm elections, opening up the possibility Trump's dealings will be scrutinized even further, the president demanded Sessions' resignation as Attorney General and installed Whitaker. November 9th, 2018, quote, "I don't know Matt Whitaker," unquote, Trump said, suggesting he hired him because he had worked for Sessions. "He was always extremely highly thought of, and still is. But I don't know Matt Whitaker. He worked for Attorney General Sessions." And that's where we are. Trump has appointed an unscrupulous grifter to be acting Attorney General of the United States because that is exactly the kind of person he attracts. He does this because he thinks he can get away with it. His base and the spineless Republicans in the Senate will let him. Will the rest of us? That is a good question. I do not know. By the way, in terms of errors, we have this at the bottom. An earlier version of this article referred to Whitaker as a football star with 200 yards and 2 touchdowns in 3 seasons at Iowa. Remember, he's a tight end. It appears he was an unspectacular player. We regret the error. Who knows? Maybe somebody can tell me whether perhaps at Iowa for a tight end to have any touchdowns at all might be a remarkable thing, depending on their style of play. But okay, yeah, I could, see where maybe he wasn't exactly a star. But getting to play football at Iowa, that's a big-time program. Okay, congratulations to you, Matt. Whether or not you should be Attorney General, I think we'd have to say no, really, based on what we've seen from you so far. Okay, let's see. We may have to break it off just for a moment here, and that'll give us a chance to check on our synchronization anyway. And let's see. We've got to take care of some actual business here, but there's much, much more happening with Whitaker. At least I have many, many more articles. Let's just sort of scan down and take a look at some of the other versions of this and see whether they offer us anything different. For instance, right alongside the Esquire piece, I have a Washington Post piece of the same, on the same subject, and I think the same date here. Whitaker's unusual path to Justice Department, including owning daycare center, trailer maker, and concrete supplier. I think we at least referenced this article, if not read it. Did we read it? I can't recall. Well, you know what? Let's just take a quick look and regroup and figure out whether this is what we want to do next or whether we move on to the next entry on the subject. All right. Well, with that offline bit of work taken care of, I don't know what I was doing. I was actually going to, I took some time out there to make sure that the daily recap post that Scott Anderson works on got posted timely and was included in the midday linky. I did some time traveling. I went back to Monday and made sure that job was taken care of. And only after taking the time out did I realize, we probably actually had enough time that I could have kept going straight into the third break so that when I came out of the third break, it would be a straight shot to being finished and I could just stop at that point. Anyway, never mind. Probably this makes no sense to you anyway. But during the break, I realized, yes, the Washington Post piece that I had opened up, which did sound awfully familiar, was in fact one that we shared last week on the show. I recognized some of the language in there as definitely having been discussed on the air. Remember, they even used the name of the company that the trailer company that they bought and were promoting. The Road Huskies, remember them? If you want a tough, dependable trailer that will keep pulling long after the others have died, you need a Road Husky. You remember that one? Okay, I certainly do. So we don't need to recap that one, but I'll include it in the list of links that I give to Scott for the write-up, just so you can refresh your memory on this one. There are other stories, though, still plenty of them that we haven't gotten to about Whitaker, and I feel like we ought to get them all out there on the table. This one caught my eye on Twitter when Charlie Savage, the New York Times writer, tweeted this one out. Is it in fact his piece as well? I'm not certain about that. Maybe we'll open it up and make sure. No, it isn't, but he has high praise for it anyway. He and very often these stories grab my attention, and I take the story and I put it in pocket, and I realize, there was one when Charlie and others of you tweet about these things, you often pull out a tidbit that you think is extraordinarily important or something that's at least great introductory material for the piece. So I'm going to rely on Charlie for this one here in his tweet. He says, "We knew Whitaker was a critic of Russia, the Russia inquiry, but it turns out that he's much more, I guess we'll say. In July of 2017, he interviewed with White House counsel Don McGahn to be the administration's chief defender against it. That is to say, against the Russia inquiry. Trump gave the job to Ty Cobb, remember that guy? Instead, but has now installed Whitaker as Mueller's supervisor. That's an extremely important point, one which we'll all realize shortly, I'm sure, when we read through this piece. Matthew Whitaker, an attack dog with ambition beyond protecting Trump. This in the New York Times of November 9th. Adam Goldman, Michael D. Shear, and Mitch Smith on the byline. President Trump first noticed Matthew G. Whitaker on CNN in the summer of 2017, and he liked what he saw. A partisan defender who insisted there was no collusion between Russia and the Trump campaign. How could you fail to like a guy who gets on there and uses the words no collusion? So that July, the White House counsel, Donald F. McGahn II, don't confuse him with the first, interviewed Mr. Whitaker about joining the president's team as a legal attack dog against the special counsel, Robert S. Mueller III. At that point, the White House passed, leaving Mr. Whitaker, 49, to continue his media tour, writing on CNN's website that Mr. Mueller's investigation, which he had once called crazy, had gone too far. 15 months later, the attack dog is in charge. With little ceremony on Wednesday, Mr. Trump ousted Attorney General Jeff Sessions and put Mr. Whitaker, and again, remember, that's last Wednesday, not today, and put Mr. Whitaker, Mr. Sessions, as chief of staff, in charge of the Justice Department and Mr. Mueller's Russia investigation. People close to Mr. Trump believe that he sent Mr. Whitaker to the department in part to limit the fallout from the Mueller investigation, one presidential advisor said. Yeah. White House aides and other people close to Mr. Trump anticipate that Mr. Whitaker will rein in any report summarizing Mr. Mueller's investigation and will not allow the president to be subpoenaed. Yeah, and that was or has been much discussed, but essentially the speculation is that Whitaker, if he's recognized as legally in charge of the Justice Department, would be the guy to whom Mueller has to go in order to get any subpoenas of the president, anyway, signed and therefore authorized. My suggestion is sign it yourself. Or, in fact, don't bother signing it. And then just say, some people to say the subpoena has been charged and others disagree. And we'll have to leave it there and see how far that gets you. Why not? It works for everybody else. Friends that said that Mr. Whitaker, a former tight end for the University of Iowa Hawkeyes, has greater attributes beyond his loyalty to Mr. Trump, like football, I guess. He's been underestimated before, said Brenna Bird, a Republican county prosecutor in Iowa. And I guess that's true, right? I mean, by all rights, reading his resume, you'd think, no, he never comes anywhere close to the rarefied air of the top job at the Department of Justice. But then you realize, well, that air has been polluted by Donald Trump, so I guess just about anybody could make it. Okay. I mean, if Donald Trump is president, yeah, you could be attorney general. Sure. Why not? Brenna Bird, though, continues on by saying, some people look at his football background and they think, oh, he's just a football player. Others look at his football background and say, he's barely a football player. He was an Iowa Hawkeye. He'll tell you that, but he built a solid legal career completely independent of that, as many people do. I was a baseball player, and then I went to college and I did something else. You know, that means nothing. That is as superfluous a stupid quote as I could imagine, but they need to talk to somebody in Iowa. Winding down the Russia investigation. That's the next section, and that seems like a key part. The decision to fire Mr. Sessions and replace him with Mr. Whitaker has been in the works since September, when the president began asking friends and associates if they thought it would be a good idea, according to people familiar with the discussions. The answer is no, but they all told him yes, because, anything you want, Mr. Trump. The goal was not unlike the first time the White House considered hiring Mr. Whitaker. As Attorney General, he could wind down Mr. Mueller's inquiry like the president wanted. Mr. McGahn, for one, was a big proponent of the idea. So was Leonard A. Leo, the executive vice president of the Federalist Society, who regularly advises Mr. Trump on judges and other legal matters. Judges. Mr. Whitaker had also developed a strong rapport with John F. Kelly, the White House chief of staff. Nick Ayers, Vice President Mike Pence's chief of staff, was a fan too. Judging by Mr. Trump's public comments, the closed-door charm offensive was working. In an October interview on Fox and Friends, Mr. Trump said, I can tell you Matt Whitaker's a great guy. I mean, I know Matt Whitaker. Of course, later on, he says no. Oh, it's right here, as a matter of fact. Parenthetically, the New York Times writers add, on Friday, last Friday, after reports surfaced that Mr. Whitaker had called courts, quote, the inferior branch, unquote, of government, and had been on the advisory board of a company that a federal judge shut down and fined nearly $26 million for cheating customers, Mr. Trump made a bizarre comment to reporters that he was not familiar with Mr. Whitaker. I don't know Matt Whitaker. I can tell you he's a great guy. I mean, I know Matt Whitaker. Tick, tick, tick. I don't know Matt Whitaker, Mr. Trump said as he left for the first leg of a weekend trip to Paris. By early October, Mr. Whitaker was close to becoming acting attorney general, people familiar with the situation said, because Mr. Sessions had put out feelers to the White House that he wanted to resign. Hello, New York Times, wake up. His relationship with the president had so degraded by that point that he could not make the offer to Mr. Trump in person. But White House officials wanted to wait until after the midterm elections when any criticism would not affect voting. Although I guess I should stop again and say, I guess I can accept the idea that he wanted to get the hell out of there too. Why not? But you see my initial hesitation there, that they are being rather credulous about this. But, I guess I could see where it could happen without taking anything away from the venality and stupidity of the White House. Okay. So, the concern was well-founded. At 2:44 p.m. Wednesday, hours after the election was over, Mr. Trump posted his decision on Twitter that Mr. Whitaker would, quote, become our new acting attorney general of the United States. and probably attacking Attorney General too. He will serve our country well, the president wrote. Within minutes, Democrats criticized Mr. Whitaker's previous comments about the Russia inquiry and demanded he recuse himself from overseeing it. He also came under fire for serving on the advisory board of World Patent Marketing in Miami, a company that had been accused by the government of bilking millions of dollars from customers. Mr. Whitaker's time as executive director of the conservative Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, which accused many Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, of legal and ethical violations, also came under scrutiny. So did his legal views, including his stated belief that Marbury v. Madison, which established judicial review, was a bad ruling. Taking a time out for just a moment to remind ourselves of this Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust, about which I know nothing, but what they tell me here, that it accused many Democrats, including Hillary Clinton, of legal and ethical violations, seems like a dark money, wingnut welfare continuation of the work that he tried to do as U.S. attorney until, of course, the U.S. attorney scandal exploded that, and I guess they had to lay low for a while. But like we were talking about before, the McCoy prosecution, the Siegelman prosecution, and so they finally get called out for all of that in the U.S. Attorney's Office. So you take off, and a bunch of wingnut welfare beneficiaries will pay you to do this in private instead. What a scam they have going there. For now, Mr. Trump is standing by Mr. Whitaker, at least as a temporary solution. You know, it's a shame that no matter who I put in, they go after them, Mr. Trump said before leaving for Paris. It's very sad, I have to say, but he's acting. I think he'll do a very good job, and we'll see what happens. Great. It's a genius. Next up, from football field to the courtroom, which I think is really irrelevant, but okay. Mr. Whitaker's roots run deep in Iowa, where he was born and attended high school not far from Des Moines. He accepted a scholarship and played tight end for the Iowa Hawkeyes, with whom he appeared in the 1991 Rose Bowl. Mr. Whitaker scored a couple of touchdowns during his football career, including a clever one on a field goal fake. Ooh, one of those three-point kicks that Marco Rubio told us about. Mr. Whitaker did not break any records playing for the Hawkeyes, but in Iowa, college football is king. Playing for the Hawkeyes could open doors. Yes. By Big Ten standards, he was not an exceptional athlete, said Don Patterson, an assistant coach during Mr. Whitaker's time on the football team. The things we liked about him were all those intangibles that have so much to do with winning. He's a very disciplined person, very hardworking, very committed, very bright, obviously. Mr. Whitaker is listed as 6 feet 4 inches tall and 240 pounds on the Hawkeyes' 1992 roster. He embraced his status as a former football player. He graduated from law school in 1995, and as a lawyer, he became involved in Republican politics. We learned all of this. When he considered whether to run for state treasurer in 2002, Mr. Whitaker called an old friend from law school, remember Charles Larson, Jr., who had become chair of the Iowa Republican Party. He says, I knew immediately he'd be a great candidate, Mr. Larson said, who went on to serve as the United States ambassador to Latvia, in case you were wondering what happens to former chairs of Iowa Republican parties. He'd be exactly the type of candidate we'd love to have run. He had a great profile as an attorney and former Hawkeye. There's always appeal there. The son of an elementary school teacher and a sports scoreboard salesman. Interesting. Mr. Whitaker became the Republican nominee for treasurer in 2002. He toured Iowa's 99 counties. Everyone puts it the same way. That's funny. Campaigned with Senator Charles Grassley and marched in a parade in Sioux City. But he finished a distant second to a longtime Democratic incumbent. 2 years later, Mr. Whitaker was appointed by President George W. Bush to serve as the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa. Again, no experience in law enforcement, but he had Grassley's support, who recommended him. The most important cases Whitaker cited in his questionnaire, you remember, personal injury, breach of contract. Iowans knew him as a star football player, of course, Mr. Grassley said in an interview. I think we read that excerpt in the Esquire piece. Next up, section called Relentless, Abrasive, but also Iowa Nice. In interviews last week, with several Iowa lawyers, I'm stuck on the football thing. Lawyers and politicians, which starts with P, who know Mr. Whitaker, an image emerged of a respected, competent, and sharply conservative lawyer with two distinct personas. A relentless and occasionally abrasive lawyer who fought for his clients, and a genial politician who personified Iowa nice and could make an instant connection with a stranger. He practices law the way he played football, said Robert Rigg, a defense lawyer and Drake University law professor who once was involved in a case with Mr. Whitaker. He's very aggressive. He's very passionate about what he believes in. Either way, Mr. Whitaker's profile suddenly was much higher as a top federal prosecutor in Des Moines. He came under criticism for a case his office brought in 2007 against the first openly gay member of the Iowa legislature, Matt McCoy, a Democrat. You remember that story. We'll skip down to the end of it here. The evidence was not convincing, and after a 5-day trial in United States District Court in Des Moines, a jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning a verdict of not guilty. And as if I recall correctly from our first reading on this subject, that included the lunch break, that 2-hour deliberation. It was a horrible case. It was made up, and it was designed to take a high-profile Democrat who was popular, openly gay, and listed as one of the top 100 rising stars in the Democratic Party, and smear me, Mr. McCoy said in an interview, and this would have been a lot more convincing coming from somebody else, but I believe he's still telling the truth. Carrie Kupech, remember her? The Justice Department spokeswoman, rebutted Mr. McCoy. You got to punch back, right? Somebody said. The allegations of improper prosecution are ridiculous, she said. The Justice Department signed off on the case. The FBI investigated it, and career prosecutors handled the case every step of the way. So I guess we could say Mr. Whitaker blew it? I don't know. I would say so. As a federal prosecutor, Mr. Whitaker continued to show political ambition. Matt Strawn, a former chairman of the Iowa Republican Party, another one, said Mr. Whitaker was someone, quote, known inside Republican circles as someone you want on your side in a fight. Mr. Whitaker was one of 61 candidates who applied for 3 spots on the Iowa Supreme Court in 2011. Remember this one? He arrived at his interview with his family and his minister, according to a person who was part of the vetting process, but he was eliminated early and was not one of the 9 names advanced to Governor Terry Branstad for consideration. Even with your minister, eh? Gee whiz. In 2012, Mr. Whitaker supported the presidential campaigns of Tim Pawlenty and then Rick Perry, and in 2014, he was one of several Republicans who sought the party's nomination for a United States Senate seat. We know about that one and how it ended with Joni Ernst winning that seat. Mr. Whitaker's Senate campaign website outlined a platform that was conservative but well within the Republican mainstream. He described his opposition to abortion and the Affordable Care Act, and his support for gun rights, term limits, and a limited role for government. Over the last few years, we have seen too many politicians disregard the Constitution as they voted to increase the size and scope of government, Mr. Whitaker said on his campaign website. I will use my legal experience gained as a federal attorney to hold them accountable. Really? How interesting is that? Too many politicians have believed in expansive government. I will hold them accountable as a former prosecutor. That's, of course, either a non sequitur and nonsense or extremely dangerous. You decide. But on at least one issue, Mr. Whitaker bucked the party line, taking a surprising stand against the renewable fuel standard, which led to an increase in ethanol production and a boon for Iowa corn farmers. So that's where he departs, eh? In a 2014 column in the Cedar Rapids Gazette, he acknowledged that his position was considered heresy in electoral politics in Iowa. I want to do what's right for my children and your children, Mr. Whitaker said in that column. Too many politicians are so worried about getting reelected that they fear taking an unpopular position. I don't. Why does he take it? That he won't say. In recent days, Mr. Whitaker has also drawn criticism for his close ties to Sam Clovis, a fellow Iowan whose campaign for state treasurer he headed in 2014. Mr. Clovis, who later became an advisor to Mr. Trump's campaign, is a witness in Mr. Mueller's inquiry. Mr. Trump nominated Mr. Clovis last year to a position in the Department of Agriculture, but Mr. Clovis withdrew. You remember that? From consideration after scrutiny of his qualifications and his connections to the Russia investigation. The next section here, which we'll have to get to after our last break, getting noticed by Trump. We found out all the interesting information, like what he was up to in October of last year when Mr. Whitaker was telling people that he was working as a political commentator on CNN in order to get the attention of Mr. Trump. That plan worked, of course. We'll find out more about it after this break. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio, and we were continuing with the section of the New York Times piece, Matthew Whitaker, an attack dog with ambition beyond protecting Trump, reading about how he ended up getting noticed by Trump, but by now it's a familiar story, that he went into the work of being a so-called political commentator on CNN in order to get on the telly where Mr. Trump could actually see him, because that's the only thing he actually pays attention to. And if he said the right things, he would say, by God, that's the guy we want inside the inner workings of the Justice Department and the White House itself. It worked, and Whitaker returned to the Justice Department in October of 2017, having once again earned the support of Mr. Trump's closest advisors inside the West Wing. What a pack of rats, huh? Colleagues described him as affable and said he quickly ingratiated himself, gee whiz, what a surprise, with the staff in Mr. Sessions' office and those elsewhere in the building, but that reputation shifted over time as some people began to view him as the eyes and ears of the White House. Those people would, of course, include the White House, who said, you will be our eyes and ears there. Gee whiz. That, according to current and former Justice Department officials, during a briefing this spring on a sensitive criminal case that took place with members of Mr. Sessions' staff, Mr. Whitaker sighed and rolled his eyes during the presentation, according to a person briefed on the episode. His behavior during the meeting quickly spread through the building and was considered by career prosecutors to be disrespectful. Some colleagues also began to regard him with caution. He is smart and politically astute, said Gregory A. Brower, the former head of the FBI's Congressional Affairs Office. He's certainly become well connected to the administration in a short time. Mr. Grassley spoke to Mr. Whitaker this week after the president's announcement, and Mr. Whitaker conceded that he does not know how long he will remain in charge of the Justice Department. In truth, he told Mr. Grassley he hasn't, quote, the slightest idea. Okay. And also it sort of seems like an odd way of ending the piece. But I am pretty sure we have some additional writing here on Whitaker, and I think if I can just scroll down a little bit and grab it, we should be well on our way to the next piece. But I think there was a piece here somewhere about, there it is. That's the one I was looking for. The CNN piece from just a little earlier. Are they both November 9th? Is that right? Or it was earlier in my timeline in terms of grabbing things for inclusion in the show. So there were a couple of stories that fell in between there, but this one got my attention. Sessions realized too late that Whitaker was auditioning for his job. How do you like that? Evan Perez, Laura Jarrett, and Ariane DeVogue on this piece for CNN. When things were particularly bad, it says, between President Donald Trump and Jeff Sessions, the Attorney General's chief of staff, Matt Whitaker, would attend White House meetings in his place. But Sessions did not know that Whitaker, at the same time, was angling for a promotion. I told you it was a nest of rats. Whitaker, who was installed at the Justice Department by powerful White House allies, spoke and behaved like he was Attorney General, a source with knowledge of the meetings said. Wednesday, and that's again, not today. Would that even be last Wednesday? It might even be earlier than that. I've lost track. November 9th. Was that last Wednesday? What's the date? No, it's like, okay. Well, anyway. Whitaker got the job when Trump made him acting Attorney General, or purportedly so. Anyway, Trump's move puts Whitaker in charge of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's Russia investigation. We have heard that before. It has also created new controversies, with legal experts debating about the legality of the appointment and news stories featuring his past criticisms of Mueller and defense of Trump. The transformation of Sessions from influential early backer of Trump's improbable presidential campaign to frequent target of the president's scorn, I never thought he'd eat my face, is a study in the fickleness of political alliances in Washington. That is a very cute way of putting it. There's a very special fickleness going on here in Trump's Washington because it surrounds Trump. There's fickleness, don't get me wrong, but this is an extreme case. That was poorly put, folks. On Wednesday, the Attorney General received the call everyone in Washington knew was coming someday soon. John Kelly, the White House Chief of Staff, asked Sessions to submit his resignation, according to multiple sources briefed on the call. Sessions agreed to comply, but he wanted a few more days, remember this part, before the resignation would become effective. Kelly said he'd consult the president. That's a no. Soon, the sources say, top justice officials convened on the fifth-floor suite of offices for the Attorney General. Eventually, there were 2 huddles in separate offices. Among those in Sessions' office was Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, his deputy, Ed O'Callaghan, Solicitor General Noel Francisco, and Stephen Engel, who heads the Office of Legal Counsel. What's funny is those guys probably were in there looking at the Vacancies Act and other controlling statutes with regard to succession in the Department of Justice, figuring, among them was the actual successor to the job, or at least the acting successor to the job. But a few yards away, Whitaker strategized with other aides, including Gary Barnett, now his chief of staff. In other words, the huddle a few yards away with the then chief of staff and his later chief of staff, they knew what the play was. And they knew that in the other room, the clueless people who were reading the law about what should happen next were going to be completely in the dark because, they were following the law. And we don't do that in this administration. The rival huddles, which hadn't been previously reported, laid bare a break in the relationship between Sessions and Whitaker, and I would argue between the Trump administration and the law, that had emerged in recent weeks, except my break is much older, after it became clear that Whitaker played a behind-the-scenes role in an aborted effort to oust Rosenstein. A source close to Sessions says that the former Attorney General realized that Whitaker was self-dealing. Note that term. I love that term. Self-dealing, after reports surfaced in September that Whitaker had spoken with Kelly and had discussed plans to become the number 2 at the Justice Department if Rosenstein was forced to resign. And I guess Kelly said, I'll do you one better. I'll make you the number 1. In recent months, with his relationship with the president at a new low, Sessions skipped several so-called principals meetings that he was slated to attend as a key member of the cabinet. A source close to Sessions says that neither the Attorney General nor Trump thought it was a good idea for Sessions to be at the White House, so he sent surrogates. Whitaker was one of them. But Sessions did not realize Whitaker was having conversations with the White House about his future until the news broke in late September about Rosenstein. So he was clueless about his moves to replace Rosenstein, which means he was doubly clueless about his move to replace him, I'm sure. On Wednesday, as aides began drafting Sessions' resignation letter, the distrust for Whitaker burst into the open. The fact that Whitaker would become acting attorney general, passing over Rosenstein, suddenly raised concerns about the impact on the most high-profile investigation in the Justice Department, the Russia probe, led by Mueller. The Mueller probe has been at the center of Trump's ire directed at Sessions and the Justice Department. Whitaker has made comments criticizing Mueller's investigation and Rosenstein's oversight of it, and has questioned the allegations of Russian interference. Rosenstein and O'Callaghan, the highest-ranked officials handling day-to-day oversight of the Mueller investigation, urged Sessions to delay the effective date of his resignation. Soon, Whitaker strode into Sessions' office and asked to speak one-on-one to the Attorney General. The others left the two men alone. It was a brief conversation. Shortly after, Sessions told his huddle that his resignation would be effective that day. O'Callaghan had tried to appeal to Sessions, noting that he hadn't heard back about whether the president would allow a delay. At least one justice official in the room mentioned that there would be legal questions about whether Whitaker's appointment as acting attorney general is constitutional. Someone also reminded Sessions that the last time Whitaker played a role in a purported resignation, a few weeks earlier, in September, with Rosenstein, the plan collapsed. Sessions never heard in person from the president. The man who gained television fame for his catchphrase, "You're fired," doesn't actually like such confrontation and prefers to have others do the firing, people close to the president say, and of course everybody with eyeballs can tell you. Kelly called Sessions a second time to tell him the president had rejected his request for a delay. The Justice Department declined to comment for this story. There's a bit more here. We'll read on. The next section, Whitaker at DOJ. Whitaker and Sessions didn't have a prior relationship before Sessions, at the urging of the White House, accepted Whitaker as his chief of staff. Sessions interviewed him, and the two grew to have a good working relationship. Sessions liked him, but even if he didn't, the plan was already hatched for him to take the role, according to one source familiar with the matter. Leonard Leo, the influential executive vice president of the Federalist Society, recommended to then White House counsel Don McGahn that Whitaker would make a good chief of staff for Sessions. I recommended him and was very supportive of him for chief of staff for very specific reasons, Leo said Friday. I wonder if he knew about his Marbury versus Madison thing, because Federalists hate that. Jeff Sessions needed a reliable conservative, a strong manager, and someone who had credibility, who had previously served the department, he added. Barely. Whitaker was a very good former U.S. attorney, and is a very good manager. He's a no-nonsense, get-it-done kind of guy. I have a story that disputes that. The whole show has disputed that. Whitaker, a 49-year-old former U.S. attorney from Iowa and former CNN contributor, and remember we are reading a CNN article, is a gregarious, imposing presence that fits his former life as a college football tight end. His Twitter feed, which he made private in recent days, shows a picture of him weightlifting, a passion he complains he doesn't get as much time to enjoy these days. On Thursday, his first full day as acting attorney general, and with criticism of his appointment beginning to swirl, he tried to exude a calm demeanor. He convened a late afternoon meeting with senior department officials. He kept remarks brief, saying he was proud to lead them, that they've been doing good work and to keep doing what they're doing. Another call, also brief, with U.S. attorneys around the country followed. Everybody, do what you are already doing. I'm a great leader. On Friday, he sent his first department-wide message thanking Sessions for his service and extolling the work of colleagues around the country. As we move forward, I am committed to leading a fair department, with the highest ethical standards, that upholds the rule of law, knee slapper, and seeks justice for all Americans, Whitaker wrote. Now, Sessions' last day. The ignominious end to Sessions' tenure is a far cry from the early days of the 2016 campaign when he became an eager surrogate. Sessions' hard-line views on immigration became suffused in the rhetoric that Trump adopted. Sessions was the first U.S. senator to endorse Trump at a time when establishment Republicans were staying away, and He left his safe Alabama Senate seat to take the Attorney General job. Several members of his staff also joined the president's team, helping to craft some of the harsh immigration policies that Sessions often preached from Capitol Hill and which have become a cornerstone of stump speeches that Trump regularly uses to excite his political base. For whatever reason, we've decided not to call out Stephen Miller by name in this one. But okay. Months into the job, Trump had soured on Sessions for the sin of recusing himself from the federal investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 elections. Thanks for telling us. And possible connections to the Trump campaign. More recently, Sessions appeared at peace with the prospect of being ousted from office. He made a series of valedictory visits with law enforcement around the country, seeking to underline what he believes will be his legacy of strong support for law enforcement and efforts to reduce crime. I doubt that will be your legacy, but nice thought. Sessions spent Election Day on Tuesday surrounded by what he loves, cops and sweets. What a weirdo. He visited the FBI's laboratory in Quantico, Virginia, where officials warmly greeted him and provided a briefing on their latest capabilities over a plate of Milano cookies. God, he's a weirdo. He was an engaged questioner asking a scientist about DNA identification and how it has affected guilty pleas in court. Later, when he arrived in the cafeteria for lunch, a room full of FBI personnel and local police officers training in the National Academy rose to their feet as he entered the room. He went around from table to table, shaking hands, posing for pictures, soaking up the moment, and capping it off with vanilla ice cream with sprinkles. Roughly 24 hours later, he was out of a job. Well, he can always start over as a nutritionist, I guess. That a very interesting wrap-up to a very interesting article also. Wanted to check back in on one of the issues raised in the Esquire magazine piece by Jack Holmes it was in fact one of his links about the, what's his name? Matt McCoy piece, the Matt McCoy case. Read a little bit about that. The linked article in Politico. I was the subject of a political witch hunt. Matt Whitaker directed it. Of course, ironic because, of course, he's adopted the witch hunt terminology for referring to the Mueller probe. Trump's interim pick for AG was part of an investigation that was covered in partisan fingerprints, Matt McCoy wrote on November 11th. He is, by the way, still a state senator from Iowa's 21st district, it notes here. And he goes on to tell the story. On the morning of April 7th, 2006, 2 FBI agents knocked on my door. They informed me that I was being investigated about issues related to bribery and violation of the Hobbs Act. As I tried to recall what the Hobbs Act entailed, robbery and extortion mostly, they prolonged their visit by pressing play on a tape recorder. I was shocked to hear a conversation I had conducted with my business colleague Tom Vasquez. That conversation detailed a dispute we had regarding my consulting with Vasquez about a business that sold monitoring systems for senior citizens in Iowa. The federal government believed that in my demanding payment for those services and threatening to strike out on my own as a competitor, I had made what amounted to a threat to use the power of my office against him. The FBI claimed this threat was extortion by an elected Iowa state senator. I explained how I had filed the required state financial disclosure forms and that, as citizen legislators who work in the Capitol for less than 1/3 of the year, we have to have other employment, hence this dispute. They disagreed, arguing that my comments amounted to an attempt to coerce Vasquez. The Des Moines Register reported during my eventual trial that numerous Iowa officials had, quote, denied threats by McCoy and insisted that no single senator would have the power to influence purchasing decisions, unquote, by the state. So that clears things up. I guess the thinking was that he was threatening to strike out on his own as a competitor to sell these systems to the state and that he would do better and drive the other guy out of business because he was a state senator and could direct state purchasing decisions. I suppose that's by extension what they were trying to put together. However, not satisfied with snaring just me in their net, the agents went on to say that if I gave them the names of other elected officials engaged in illegal activities, the district court might be inclined to look favorably on me. The district office was led by a prosecutor named Matt Whitaker, then the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa. Whitaker, an avowed conservative who has run for state office multiple times as a Republican, was part of what would come to be widely considered a politically motivated effort by the Department of Justice to investigate Democratic office holders. And remember, that was the thing that caught our attention and brought us to this article from out of the Esquire part. And I wondered about Don Siegelman. Now, there's no mention of Don Siegelman in this piece, nor even that I could see in a linked piece that comes out of this Politico article. But it certainly was happening at the same time. I'd be surprised if there was zero connection. And I don't really know why you would forego the opportunity to say this if you really believe that there was a politically motivated effort by the Department of Justice to investigate Democratic office holders. But okay. Anyway, we'll continue on here. At the time, David Yepsen of the Register wrote, quote, "It appears the U.S. Attorney, Matt Whitaker, is aggressively going after the city's South Side Democratic Organization and the way it does business. You could call it due diligence, and to be clear, the investigation and secret recording of my conversations was done in a fully legal manner. But if you consider Whitaker's naked partisanship, as Yepsen did, and the fact that a study at the time, this is the link I was talking about, that the Ashcroft and Gonzalez Departments of Justice prosecuted Democrats to an extent grossly disproportionate to Republicans, you could refer to it as something very different. In Whitaker's own recent words, a witch hunt." The FBI agents who visited me that day were saying that if I snitched on my Senate colleagues, Whitaker's office might be lenient with me. This is all standard practice for the Department of Justice, of course, and similar to the tactics that Special Counsel Robert Mueller, who Whitaker has repeatedly criticized, has used in his ongoing investigation. But ignoring the fact that I had no knowledge of what I was supposed to have done illegally, let alone knowledge of illegal actions on the part of others, I would never have played that game. This was the first I knew I was under federal scrutiny. The FBI paid Vasquez to record 12 hours of our conversations. They turned over the tapes to the grand jury. The jury returned a one-count indictment against me, and even that is, I think, somewhat unusual, for attempted extortion under the Hobbs Act, which more specifically is a federal anti-racketeering law used in cases involving public corruption. It sets a low bar for conviction of public officials. The charge stemmed from the threat to form my own company. The FBI admitted to paying at least $2,200 to Vasquez for clandestinely taping our conversations. If I were convicted, it would have meant a $250,000 fine and 20 years imprisonment. Whitaker's entire case was built on the word of Vasquez, the star witness, whose credibility was undermined by a litany of personal issues he acknowledged under oath. In cross-examination, Vasquez had amnesia. "I can't recall, I don't remember," was his response to over 100 questions. That the FBI paid Vasquez for his testimony was unheard of, and that's why I wanted to come back to this article, because when we were discussing it in the Esquire piece, I thought that perhaps it was even a little more commonplace that they would have paid informants, but there's a very big difference here. Well, let's go on. The former editor of the Des Moines Register's editorial page, Gilbert Cranberg, stated, "The local criminal defense bar was stunned that the government had to pay the alleged victim for his help prosecuting his purported victimizer," in an editorial for the Neiman Watchdog. Interesting. I guess, and that's what sets it apart. I've heard of paid informants, but I don't think I've ever... I guess now that they bring it up, I suppose I've never heard of the idea of paying the victim of a crime to help prosecute the person that victimized them. Usually that is its own reward. I don't know about paying those guys. I guess it is unheard of. I'll take his word for it. In a local news journal, he wrote, "Was McCoy's prosecution a product of poor judgment, inexperience, misplaced zeal, or partisan politicking? Perhaps some or all of the above. I was eventually acquitted after the jury deliberated for less than 25 minutes, according to the foreman." Cranberg noted in the Register, "The case against McCoy was so anorexic that not one of the 12 jurors considered it worth protracted consideration." One of my attorneys, Montgomery Brown, stated, 90% of federal court cases result in a conviction and the swift not guilty verdict indicates something was seriously wrong with Whitaker's case. U.S. attorneys conveniently forgot to mention, I guess, that they approved paying Vasquez to covertly tape his conversations with me, a revelation that came out in the wind-up to my trial. There were no consequences for this. In denying our motion to dismiss the case, the court said this was an unfortunate, quote, lapse of memory. Had I had such a lapse, I would have been cuffed and hauled off to prison. According to my attorney, Jerry Crawford, during the trial, he walked over to the prosecuting attorneys and asked them to save face, saying, "Pull this case now. I'm embarrassed for the United States of America." Both of the attorneys he spoke to, one of whom had been flown in from Washington, D.C. by the DOJ, said they were instructed to carry out the case to its fullest extent. Somebody in Washington, or in Whitaker's office, was making this call, and the trial prosecutors didn't have control over it. They knew they were out-lawyered, and they were getting slaughtered daily in court, but they couldn't bring it to a close, which would have saved them both money and time. Whitaker's office clearly wanted to give the evangelical right within the Republican Party a trophy, and that trophy was me, one of the state's most prominent young Democrats at the time. Whitaker is a social conservative who supported the Iowa Christian Alliance, the preeminent group in the state for like-minded conservatives. In 2014, he was executive director of the Foundation for Accountability and Civil Trust, FACT, get it? FACT, a conservative watchdog, which Slate described as a, quote, dark money-funded Clinton antagonist, which largely publicized what it described as ethical lapses by prominent Democrats and requested that government agencies and law enforcement investigate them. People should be very concerned with Whitaker's elevation to acting attorney general. The DOJ is supposed to be blind to politics. Whitaker clearly is not. All right, well, that wraps up that article. There's one more thing that I think we can at least squeeze just a little bit of it into our consideration before closing things out for the day. We're not going to get through the entirety of this piece, but another Washington Post piece, this one by Carol Leonig and Rosalind Helderman. I happened to catch Carol's tweet on this one. It gives you the choicest bit of the piece, so we might as well just get that one out there. She tweeted, AG Mark Whitaker. Of course, he's not the AG, and he only purports to be the acting AG. Mark Whitaker blew off a federal subpoena. How do you like that? From federal investigators probing his role in fraud company at the same time he was first joining the DOJ. That really is pretty remarkable. And let's get what we can of this article on the record here. Federal investigators last year, remember this was last year, looked into whether Matthew G. Whitaker, as an advisory board member of a Miami patent company, you know the one, accused of fraud by customers, played a role in trying to help the company silence critics by threatening legal action, according to two people with knowledge of the inquiry, which is incredibly ironic given his prosecution of Matt McCoy, right? Whitaker, named last week, by President Trump as acting attorney general, occasionally served as an outside legal advisor to the company, World Patent Marketing, writing a series of letters on its behalf, according to people familiar with his role. But he just blew off, an October 2017 subpoena from the Federal Trade Commission seeking his records related to the company, according to two people with knowledge of the case. The FTC alleged in a 2017 complaint that the company bilked customers with fraudulent promises that it would help them market their invention. You know all about that. Whitaker was not named in the FTC complaint, and there was a settlement, of course. Justice Department officials declined to comment on Whitaker's handling of the FTC subpoena. In a statement, the Justice Department spokeswoman, Carrie Kupich, said, Acting Attorney General Matt Whitaker has said that he was not aware of any fraudulent activity. Any stories suggesting otherwise are false, which, as you know, means they are absolutely true and should be looked into immediately. Whitaker's connection to World Patent Marketing came as a surprise to both senior Justice Department and White House officials, several officials said. In their investigation, FTC staff had sought to learn more about the role played by the company's advisory board members, including Whitaker, a former U.S. attorney, whose role was prominently highlighted by the company in news releases and marketing materials. The company said the board would help review inventors' ideas to maximize their ability to get rich, according to promotional materials. In truth, the board did not meet and rarely reviewed inventors' ideas, but that's not even the important part. Whitaker, however, appeared to act at times as an attorney for the company, according to people with knowledge of his role. Whitaker has told officials he served in a limited capacity as an outside legal advisor to the company, blah, blah, blah. But, of course, we read those emails back and forth. We know what he was up to. When the FTC subpoenaed Whitaker for his records related to the company in October of 2017, he failed to provide any information, telling investigators that he was busy at that time moving from Iowa to Washington for a new job, according to people with knowledge of the case. And guess what the new job was? Preparing to assume a new post, chief of staff to the then actual honest-to-God Attorney General, Jeff Sessions. Isn't that amazing? That's what he did. He blew off the subpoena from the FTC looking into his role with this company because he was too busy becoming chief of staff to Jeff Sessions.
From Daily Kos Radio on networksradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Yeah, pretty interesting. There's another paragraph here that, by the way, says another advisory board member who also did legal work for the company, guy in New York by the name of Eric Kreisman, said he also received a subpoena, and he said, I thought you kind of had to respond to subpoenas. If you're busy, that doesn't give you the right to avoid it. Well, I guess he does if you think you're going to be Attorney General within months. We'll be back tomorrow.